Many of us are concerned about finding a safe place to live in the world, legally eliminating our tax bills so that we're not funding a war, especially a war that is closing down our church, to say the least, how awful that is. Well, Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show podcast, is hosting a free online event at expatmoneysummit.com. They're going to discuss things like, well, legally eliminating your tax bill, like I said, international wealth protection, second passports, offshore banking. It's going to be the largest offshore event in the world. Now check this out. You want to hear some speakers? First and foremost is one of my heroes, Ron Paul. The great Ron Paul will be speaking. But check this out. Peter Schiff will be speaking. The great Tom Woods will be speaking. Friend of the show, Tom Luongo, will be speaking. Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Jim Rogers, plus international lawyers, offshore precious metal dealers, foreign real estate experts, and much, much more. You can pick up a free ticket. That's free at expatmoneysummit.com. Again, it's Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show podcast, hosting a free online event. Pick your ticket up at expatmoneysummit.com. Let's get back to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, the icon, the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again. This is the Counterflow Podcast. Great to have you with us here for yet another week. And what a weekend this past weekend was in Tobaccoville, North Carolina, over there for the Ludwell Orthodox Fellowship Inaugural Conference. We had that again in Tobaccoville, North Carolina. It was a great weekend. I was honored to MC the event, and what a lineup of speakers. Several who have been on this show. You might remember Clark Carlton. He did a great job. And Dr. Don Livingston. He will be on this show at some point, but it was a pleasure to meet him. We had Metropolitan Jonah there, and friend of the show, Father John Whiteford, who will be back on the show in a couple of weeks here. We had my friend George Michaelopoulos. We had Father Mark Mancuso. It was a great time, and that, again, was the inaugural experience. And our friend of the show, Rebecca, Dissident Mama, did a lot to put that on. So look for it to happen next year. One of my sound producers, Ben, of course, did the sound for the event, and he did a terrific job. All of those recordings of each of those speeches will be available soon. When they are, I'll let you know where they will be at. So as for this show, the wonderful Amy Mastrini, Amy the artist, you've heard her ad on this show probably, is our guest today. She's one half of the Mystic Sisters over at the Mystic Sisters podcast, of course, with her twin, Julie Mastrini. She's an Orthodox Christian. She does wonderful artwork of not only just beautiful mystical style art, but icons, as you will obviously see in the ad we have for her in this show. Wonderful sponsor of the show. Her story is crazy. It's there's some stories that have a similar arc as this, where you're kind of lost and maybe you're an atheist or into leftism and feminism and these type of things. And somehow, through the grace of God, you find your way home to the church, the Orthodox Church. But her stuff was a little bit, I went through some crazy things, but not like this. I know Amy personally. When I heard her talk about some of these things, I had to get her on here. And I find it interesting that her spiritual illness, as she calls it, when she was swimming in leftism and these bad ideas. At one point, she couldn't even really speak because she knew the ideas that would be coming out of her mouth were incorrect, so her body would not let her speak them. And I find it fascinating, and she's very open and honest about her spiritual illness back then, turning basically into not only mental issues, but physical issues. She was physically sick from the environment that she was in. And by the grace of God, she did find her way home to the Orthodox Church. And we get through all of these details, these stories, this wild arc in her life. And the journey's not over yet, obviously, for any of us. So I think you're going to find this to be a very good and it's a very personal experience that she goes through, and she is very kind and sweet to let us in on the details of this. So, without any further ado, for the first time as a solo guest, Amy Mastrini, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Buck.
Yeah, Amy the artist. Amy the artist. You guys will see this ad featuring this young lady during this episode. So, since it's your first time solo, you've been on with your sister, Julie, the Mystic Sisters. Go ahead and tell them, my audience, anything you'd want them to know pertinent to this discussion, kind of about what you do, who you are, and then we'll jump off from there.
Yeah, so my name's Amy. I go by Amy the artist online, and I am an oil painter. I specialize in portraiture, and lately I've been focusing on iconography and religious art. I do other things too, though, like landscapes and such. And I'm a twin, an identical twin, and we call ourselves the Mystic Sisters. We do fire dancing performances. We have a podcast, and we run a joint Substack together, and that's mostly cultural commentary from just our perspective.
A perspective that's changed a lot over the years. I guess we'll get into your background, because I think the town that you grew up in is pertinent to where your journey certainly goes, and then leaving it, etc. So talk about your background as a youth, as a young lady in a small town, Pennsylvania.
Yes, so I grew up in a very small town, population 3,000 people, and in a big Italian Catholic family, and had kind of the idyllic childhood, aunts, uncles, cousins, all within walking distance, grandparents nearby. But I think I was very high openness and creative, and maybe I didn't understand a lot of the underlying ideas that were running the town. So, fast forward to my teen years, we got a faster internet connection. And I think that was probably the beginning of me sort of falling away from being Catholic. And I started to read message boards online about feminism and progressive ideas and things like that. I was probably about 14 when this started to happen. So, that's just the context.
How do you come upon? I vaguely do remember message boards as well, even like chat rooms or something like that on AOL. How do you come upon message boards at that age that are, I guess, covered with feminist ideas and whatnot?
For me, I think I got a young women's magazine, like at Walmart or Giant Eagle or something, and they had a message board, and they advertised it in their magazine. So I went there, and other young women and college-age students were posting on that message board. I think that's how it started. Also, my mother read People magazine a lot, and we were really into movies and celebrities, and I found a LiveJournal message board called Oh No They Didn't, very old, dating myself here. And it was celebrity gossip. And in the comments, there was a lot of feminist commentary and like commentary from young gay men in college.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Women and gay men on the message boards.
Yes, I assume. Yeah.
Okay.
Feminists.
And so this was, you said 14-ish. Were you political at all? I mean, obviously ideas within feminism are in a political and cultural realm, so to speak. Did you have like a political identity?
Yeah, I was a big Democrat.
Okay.
My mother was a Democrat, and my sister was, and most of the people in my family were. And I didn't even know conservative ideas, really. I just thought that was default. Yeah.
Okay. And you say Democrat, it's 2023 now. People think of more insanity probably than there was when you were 14. It wasn't like your family was preaching trans messaging and whatnot. It was just kind of your basic union kind of family Democrats in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, because I come from a family of Italian coal miners, and unions were very important to them because from what I understand, the unions were the coal mining companies were pretty genuinely oppressive, and the workers really didn't have a lot of rights. So Democrats of the past, I think it was just a holdover of the past when they needed more workers' rights. So, But things had changed by the time I was 14. It was was, yeah, it wasn't trans stuff, but it was like gay rights, women's rights.
Okay.
Like,
did you start to make friends on the message boards and feel like a connection or even, I know community, we know it's not that, but did you feel like it was at the time?
Not really. It was a little different from the internet now. Like I wasn't participating.
Okay.
I was just reading and I guess kind of brainwashing myself.
Okay. Yeah, they were doing that for you. You also said growing up Catholic, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do know you guys. It seems like it was more of a culturally Catholic thing than necessarily like knowing all the doctrine and the dogma of Catholicism. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. I feel like I did not get a Catholic education. We didn't read the Bible. It wasn't explained to me like the history of the church.
Mm-hmm.
It was very much just, this is what we do. Just do your duty and just go and don't question it. Don't ask questions. And my Sunday school teachers didn't like that. They would stall and then never answer.
Really?
And this, I should say, was a Novus Ordo church, which is New Order. If I'm not mistaken, it was something the Pope did in the 60s. They kind of stripped out a lot of the tradition of the Catholic.
Vatican II, I believe.
Yeah, Vatican II. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
so this church was very modern. It was developed by an architect in the 70s and not traditional.
Is it the one in your town that I've seen that you have pointed out?
Yeah, I always joke that it looks like the Eye of Sauron tower in Lord of the Rings because it's just a circle and then this steep tower that's pointy. It's almost menacing looking. It's always covered with birds too.
It is. And I've heard you call it an atheist factory.
Yes, because none of my peers took any of it seriously. None of us were into church or Sunday school at all. We made fun of it. We thought it was silly. We couldn't wait to leave. And a lot of the people I went to school with became atheists.
Okay. So your teenage years were experiencing this type of thing. Then where did you go?
So then I went to college, and college is where a lot of my liberalism was reinforced. And that's when I really dropped Catholicism. Because I should say also, I did like to pray as a little girl, and I had good grandmothers that like gave me rosaries and holy water and things like that. Like there were definitely parts of Catholicism that I liked, but a lot of it wasn't explained well to me. But by the time I got to college, I remember being in my dorm room and my friends arguing about the existence of God. And the end of the conversation, it seemed that everyone in the room had concluded that God wasn't real. And I remember a part of me being like, I kind of think he might be real, but I guess they're right. So I'm going to drop that. And that was it. I remember very clearly like a moment of just dropping the existence of God. And almost immediately I had bad symptoms. I had anxiety. Life got harder after that. And college was not an environment where I heard conservative or Christian ideas. So everything around me was like reinforcing atheism and liberalism.
It's funny to think of as an adult, especially as old as I am, but probably even at your age, to the phrase when you said, I was in this girl's dorm, the girls at a university were talking, and they pretty much concluded that there's no God. like the pinnacle of brain power, just figured out the world's biggest mystery,
Yeah, so self-assured.
yeah, exactly. Were they pulling you leftward at that point, the university culture itself? I suppose you said there was no Christian or conservative things. This was at Penn State, if I'm not mistaken, and that's just you're swimming in the waters of progressivism.
Yeah, Penn State main campus. I think looking back, some of the young guys were more conservative and had come from conservative towns, but the institution itself, all my professors were liberal. I didn't encounter any conservative professors there. And there was a group of like queer activists there, and I got in with them. And there was the LGBTQ student office, and all of these things were very much represented and available to me. And there were a lot of is it SSDS? It's a young communist group, a young socialist group.
Oh, okay. I don't even know.
They were pretty active, and I went to some of their meetings. I think Jordan Peterson was involved with them when he was in school also. And Yeah, there was like an anarchist bookstore. I worked above it in an art store, and below was this coffee shop that was just full of communists all the time. So I mean, if there were there was a conservative presence, I didn't encounter it. Maybe it was what I was seeking at the time, but it really, I revisited Penn State a few years ago, and it was even more far to the left now than it was then. So I think it's been on that trajectory for a long time.
Was there a sense in you like, this is what I didn't learn in my small hick town? Like, this is the worldly ideas that no one was going to teach me in that small redneck town of something like this. Like, my parents wouldn't have known anything like this. I'm enlightened now.
Oh, absolutely. I thought that I was from a backwards town. I used to say that. They're backwards. Like, they're looking to the past. And I thought that this was the way to be intelligent. I think because I wasn't, I'm from like the sticks in Pennsylvania, and people there have good moral code, but maybe they're not very articulate. And so I just thought their ideas were stupid because they weren't articulated to me. And in university, people were articulating liberal ideas and atheist ideas in a way that sounded very sophisticated and really seemed to make sense, up here. So I think I was very persuaded by that.
Yeah, the irony of that, the people in the small town had good moral code, weren't articulate. You go to the university, really bad moral code, but extremely articulate. And it makes the young lady who hasn't experienced a whole lot think, listen how smart these people sound. Just because they sound smart, these people must have the right ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It's something I've thought about a lot. It's like high verbal IQ, but without the underlying wisdom. And then, in this area, it's maybe some lower verbal IQ. A lot of people didn't go to college, but they're a lot wiser than the people I met at university.
I know one of the things you focused on a lot and discussing, and sometimes for the negative, sometimes for the positive, are male roles versus women's roles and whatnot. What were you experiencing at the college level with the progressive people?
Oh, they were very convinced that there was a patriarchy that was oppressive. You heard those two words together all the time, oppressive patriarchy. And there was this notion that women are oppressed and kept out of opportunities in society. And I was very convinced of that. I think I also looked around at like the young men around me, and they were not very serious because they were young. And that might have pushed me further into feminism because I was like, well, look at them. They're not, very put together. They're drinking all the time and, hooking up. So I never took up culture when I was a feminist. But so there were plenty of professors there that were like from Berkeley that I had for communication classes that were just raging feminists, and they really liked me. So
what was the gay culture like, as far as, did it cloud in your mind the men and women's roles in society and culture? Did that tweak it in a bad way?
Oh yeah, because they had a lot of, again, like fancy, sophisticated language and terms for what they perceived as an oppressive heteronormative society, and they would kind of try to I am straight and was then, and they would kind of try to get me to question my sexuality by saying that there's heteronormative programming in society. We're all just told we're supposed to be straight, but have you really thought about it? Maybe you're not, like introducing this doubt. It didn't work on me, but it was definitely there. And I think it worked on other people.
Was this
like a psyop?
Was it gay? It is a psyop. Was this gay men or women or both? What?
It was men. It was effeminate gay men mostly. And they called themselves queer, and they had pronouns, they wanted to communicate their pronouns even then. And this was 10 years ago. So, and some women. Yeah, there was a woman in the group who was Mexican and white, but she hated white people and men. And she had a white boyfriend. So it was very
right. Yeah. You said a word, and I've heard you say it before, and it's kind of new to me. I guess that's a good thing. I don't know. Heteronormative. And if you could create a term in a propaganda lab, this sounds like one that you could create. What does that mean again? There's people that are listening right now. They're like, what? Because I had never heard this.
Yeah, it's definitely a propaganda term. I think it means that heterosexuality is considered normal, but it's a way to say that it's not.
like there's some kind of scale or something like between, we're all on some sort of scale and you're not really one thing. Is that what they're getting at?
Yeah, I think it's just a way to attack straight people. And I kind of want to like look up the definition right now, but I think it's a way to like frame something as non-inclusive of gay people, and also a way to be deconstructionist. Like, well, that's just heteronormative. We can tear that down, and there's a broader truth here. It's a very dismissive term. The connotation is that it's not good, right?
Right.
It's always used in a bad way.
I looked it up. Let's see.
Yeah.
The view that all human beings are either male or female, both in sex and in gender, that sexual and romantic thoughts and relations are normal only when between people of different sexes, that's heteronormativity. Discrimination against non-heteronormative individuals. Okay. So they're saying this is kind of a construct that you were groomed to think like, well, you think that you're a female that only likes males. But again, postmodern deconstructionism is we deconstruct that, and the real truth is your lived truth or something along these lines, I guess is what they're getting at.
Yes, totally. You can be anything. And basically the idea that it's programming, even though sexual dimorphism is a well-proven and scientific concept.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a very much a term used for their own social programming. It's ironic because they're kind of telling you that you've been groomed, but they're trying to groom you, ironically, into like the queer agenda.
Yes.
So.
Amy, you've been programmed to think this way. So here we are trying to program you to think our way is essentially what they're doing.
Exactly.
Did it, you had, I know this for a fact, but you can talk about this for the audience too. You have also good males in your life. It's like your dad's great. And so I'm hoping that's maybe is something what kind of kept you grounded in some way.
Yeah, because when I talk about these things and say that I used to be New Age and liberal and feminist, I think people picture something a lot more dramatic than I actually was. Like, I looked very much the same. I didn't have like rainbow hair or anything. And I think what you said is true. I have a very good father. I had a great grandfather, really good uncles. So I always had a sort of inner Catholicism or bulwark against this stuff where it was very much around me and I was involved in it, like open to it maybe being the truth. But there were degrees to which I didn't adopt it also because of my upbringing. And I had that to fall back on later. And it was like a homecoming, but we'll get to that part.
Did your parents know what you were doing culturally, politically, I guess, with these type of folks?
No, a little bit. I don't think they realized the extent to which the culture had fallen. They were in this small town their entire lives and didn't really realize what young people were dealing with the advent of like digital communication and these bad memes going around. So no, and I think I was really desperate to get out and be my own person. I didn't talk to them as much as I do now. So that's what.
Had they found out, I don't know, that you were in a certain running in these circles, if they were to have said, Amy, I don't think this is right. It seems like these people are kind of off the rails. What would you have thought? Would it have been like a futile effort on their part?
I honestly wish my parents had stepped in more and been more involved. I think baby boomers can be, no offense, but they can be a bit hands off. They're a bit like, oh, who's to say? They have kind of a bit of a hands off approach with their children. But one time I did bring home this book called Work, and it was the idea that like working a job is oppressive and very communist. And it was like illustrated. And I was like, look at this book. And my dad goes, this seems like communist propaganda. And that like stuck with me. I was like, oh, my dad didn't like it. Cause I would like always wanted my dad's approval.
Sure.
I always wanted to be a good girl, And I was like, oh, he didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I was seen. But
yes. Yeah, exactly. And also to clarify, they were not really churchgoers at this point. So it's not like they were saying, Amy, come back home, go to our church or anything of that sort.
No, by that point, growing up, my mother would go to church. My dad didn't go. He stopped going, I think, before I was born. My mother would go and try to get me out of bed to go, and I'd push back. Why do I need to do this? I don't understand. She didn't really have good answers for me. And and then eventually, honestly, I think it was my fault. I think me pushing back made her maybe think, yeah, maybe we don't need this anymore. And she stopped going as well.
I know a lot of you guys want to see more beauty in this world, in this culture, because modern art is so degenerate and nihilistic. It does seem that there's a huge need to share the beautiful Christian art. Some artists are working to keep tradition alive. My good friend and friend of the show, Amy Mastrini, Amy the artist, she's been painting for 11 years. She's an Orthodox Christian. She creates icons of Jesus Christ, Mary, the saints, and so on. Her work is done in oil and gold leaf. It's really, really nice. I have some pieces from Amy. It's the perfect opportunity to beautify your home or give a gift to your loved ones for a holiday or a birthday. She sells art prints, stickers, original paintings on her website. Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. That is amy-the-artist.com. She is currently accepting commissions as well. She says a lot of her work is intended to honor the divine and sacred. How wonderful is that? Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. Follow her on Instagram at amy_the_artist. Let's get back to the show. The young lady that you hung out with, this stuck with me too, hearing you speak about this, anti-white, and she was half white. Was that prevalent, that sort of attitude? Well, I guess I can say this, the fact that she was this and wasn't like excluded from society means it was at least allowable to have this anti-white sentiment. Was it more common?
That was entirely common. White supremacy, and these things are still going on today, but there was this idea that white men run everything and oppress women, people of color, and queer people. And like white men are the enemy. And I didn't connect at the time that like everyone who had raised me and been kind to me was a white man. Mm-hmm. But I did see her hypocrisy a bit. I was like, but you're dating a white man. Mm-hmm. And I found that a little odd. That was a little bit of a chip in the narrative, you know, the stated preferences versus revealed preferences kind of thing.
Yeah.
You claim you don't like white men, but it seems like you do.
And we can be careful with wording here. They're saying that white men run the show or run everything. There is a specific type of person that does run a lot of things. We don't have to reveal that, but was that ever mentioned? Any certain specific culture?
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Okay.
Not at all. Protected group. Uh-huh. And exactly. We didn't get too into religious differences. Like Christianity wasn't really spoken about. It was all race and gender.
Okay. Yeah. And so you're looking at you're being taught by your peers to look at everything with oppressive person versus victim culture of all of this. There's like almost like a totemic nature of like, well, this person's a little bit better off, but this person's way bad, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. There's a totem pole of oppression.
Yes.
And everything's very black and white. It's very black and white thinking.
Yeah, no pun intended.
Yeah,
because it's two-dimensional. This entire thing. And you had said earlier that you were manifesting some of your stresses, I suppose, with physical ailments. Can you talk about that?
I can get into that part of the story. So then come post-college, I graduate, and I think I'm just totally ill-equipped to deal with reality, right? And I'm still thinking this way. I had moved to the right a little economically, and I was kind of like a social liberal and a libertarian. I was like a left libertarian at this point.
Okay.
And still an atheist, still a feminist. And we just talked about black and white thinking. Eventually, all of this culminated in me having major physical symptoms. So I stopped getting out of bed. I stopped speaking. When I did go to work, I wouldn't talk to anybody because I was very afraid that what I said would be wrong. And this was very strange to me. I had no idea why I couldn't speak, but I just knew that there was deep fear that whatever came out of my mouth would be like incorrect. Now I think it's because I had no logos, like no truth to speak. And some part of my consciousness was holding me back from speaking. So major spiritual and existential crisis as a result of all this thinking that had been growing over the years, that I've been following over the years. It was like my body being like, hey, alarm bells, like the way that you're thinking, you need to change the way that you're thinking.
Wow.
Because my mind couldn't run my body anymore. It gave me no will to live. Like I saw everything as oppressed. And so it was like, what's the point? Like, if I'm just a woman and men run everything and there's no hope, and I'm in a capitalist system where, everything's like cheap and doesn't matter, and all I'm going to do is go to work for the rest of my life. There's no God. Then what is the point of living? And I had that inquiry, which is actually an intelligent inquiry, I think.
Yes,
like, why should you be alive? Like, why am I here? What's my purpose? And but I had no answer. And I remember I would have panic attacks. Like I'd sit up in bed and like that, and just like felt like I was dying. And none of my roommates knew what to do with me. They would come into my room and just be like, Amy, it's okay. And try to put on a movie so I'd calm down. And if I either couldn't sleep or I was sleeping throughout the whole day. And like, I just wanted to die because I was in so much pain. Like, I felt like electric shocks were going through my body sometimes. Wow. It was very strange. Like, part of the panicking was like, I don't know. It was very physically painful. Like this ideology resulted in like physical, and which I think is connected to spiritual pain for me. And I was like, I need help. I'm going to end my life because I can't live like this. And I was scaring myself, and I knew I couldn't like actually kill myself because I didn't like know how to kill a body. And I was also like, what if I mess it up? And then life is even worse than this,
Yes.
So I went, and I should say at the time, like the way I was living, like, and how I was thinking was manifesting in physical symptoms for me. I have no idea how the people around me like weren't feeling this intensely.
Yeah.
Like they were getting up and going to work, and I don't know what they were running on. Because for me, not having God and not having a good lens through which to view the world was just, I couldn't function. Like I had in my mind's eye, like I could see like this like path that you're going down leads to you like dying, like shooting yourself in the woods. Like that's where it's going. You're not going anywhere. You're going to die. So it was very intense for me. I think just because I'm like a sensitive artist type, maybe. But anyway, I knew I needed help. So I reached out to a bunch of therapists in the DC area. And I think they were very overwhelmed by me, most of them. I think they were not used to a young woman having an existential crisis. Like they were probably used to girls being like, I'm nervous at work, and like me and my boyfriend are fighting. And I was like, I want to kill myself. And they were like very...
So you said that to them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I'd cry in their office like, I don't know why I should be here. Like very... now I look back, I'm like, wow, it's super melodramatic, but it was genuine at the time. I was very disturbed. And I think these therapists were like women who had careers in DC and then just kind of thought, I'll be like a therapist and like use Buddhism. And,
yes.
And it was just not working for me.
Almost like yoga moms getting a degree to help people out, just being empathetic and grateful.
Exactly.
You did say, we skipped a little part about getting to DC. You said you graduated. What was in DC for you?
Yeah. So I was working for a libertarian nonprofit.
Okay.
And I was very plugged into this libertarian scene. And if
some of my listeners will know what the Coctopus is all about, the Koch brothers or whatnot. That's the scene you were kind of tangled up in?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was... I could say a lot of things about it. I learned a lot, but it was a think tank, and I came from this blue collar area where we like make things, and I didn't know what we were like doing there. It was all idea generation.
Yes.
And I was so confused by it because I'm like someone who is used to like making things, even if it's like digital media, right?
Yeah.
Or things for school, papers. I was like, what are we doing here? And then everyone was very just... No one believed in God. I think a couple people did. And later I look back, and some of the libertarians who believed in God were probably the most stable for me to be around.
Yes.
Yeah. So
there's not as many of them. I was involved a lot, not professionally, so I wasn't working for them, I guess. But the people at the Mises Institute, which was in Alabama, and as you could imagine, quite a bit different culturally than let's say, the Cato Institute in DC. A lot of them were Catholic, a lot of them were Christian, not all of them, but I always found them to be so much more genuine. I'm talking about the Ron Pauls of the world, and as opposed to these, I would hear people from the Cato Institute talk about these papers, these white papers, and these studies they're doing on Social Security reduction, and we're going to give it to this. And I just would think, what are you doing? Like what you're saying, like you're not really
doing
nothing
anything.
you do is important. Like what are you doing this for? It's such a strange culture.
It's very abstract, and nothing was getting done.
No, exactly. Yeah.
You don't win elections. Like nothing was happening.
Right. Yes.
And
I
it
would
was like
picture I would picture them making this study on Social Security, going to a cocktail party with politicians. Hey, trying to kiss up to them, you give them your white paper or whatever. You walk off and the guy throws it in the trash. That's what I kept imagining.
Yeah. And you'd be right. It was just like no work was getting done. There were no fruits of this like ideology.
Right.
It was just like we were getting money, and everybody was like people were like doing drugs in the bathroom. Like, yeah, it was. So I heard. I didn't do them with them, but it was just very like, very just. I couldn't. It was so abstract. I just couldn't. I think my part of my consciousness was right when I was like having a crisis about it. Like, yes. I don't feel like there's any meaning here.
Right.
Yeah.
What was the spirit of DC like?
See, in the libertarian circles, I met a lot of like young anarchists, young men. There weren't a lot of women. There's a lot of young male anarchists that were very just like, don't tell me what to do. And they were just like, had a huge chip on their shoulder about authority, and they hated paternalism. So I think I ended up there as a feminist because like in this group, everybody hated fathers, or like the concept of like paternity and patriarchy. Like libertarians hated that also because they didn't like daddy government telling them what to do. But then what does that attract? It attracts a lot of like very misguided young men that, if you want to call them men, young guys.
Right.
That so they weren't very well-oriented guys. They wanted to do whatever they wanted to do. The spirit of like this libertine spirit was the ethos, I think. Just I want to do whatever I want, even if that means like, sex and drugs. I can't say violence because they have the non-aggression principle.
Right.
But
and I don't think this is going to be the case with libertarians that you were working with and around, having an anti-human view. But did you experience that with the lefties on college campus? I've always felt this, like there's this anti-human spirit that's feeding them with this like veil of fake empathy over the top of it. Did you experience something like that?
Yeah, well, in the left, there was also the environmental stuff where they looked at humans as like a cancer
of course.
On the planet. And I think I had that view. Like I just thought humans were scum and humans were bad, but it's so ironic because you are a human. So it's all self-hatred. It's all projection. It was very, I guess, prideful too, because it was like, well, my ideas are superior, even though most humans are scum.
Yeah.
I have the right ideas. And then libertarians were all about like human prosperity, and they were a little like, kinder and gentler about human endeavors. Mm-hmm. But most of them in DC still ended up being nihilistic because their rejection of authority was such that, well, then there's no guidance for anything. And your moral code is like up to you, except for the non-aggression principle.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody there's so much discord.
Yes, I have found, and I'm not knocking the libertarians in my audience because this is not the case with every libertarian, but I have found some libertarians to have a very almost not materialistic, but a very thin view of a non-nuanced view of what harm is. So they'll often say, you can't punch someone and you can't take their things. Fair enough, that's harm. But there's a lot of nuance and other levels you could abstract from there, other ways you could harm someone. For instance, if there was a gay pride or pro-nude event in my neighborhood here, that's harming this culture that I'm living in, that harms kids that see these things. Your sister and I were in Philly, as you know, and there's a naked bike parade, thousands of people deep, and parents had their kids watching it. So they weren't physically being assaulted. They weren't being stolen from. But to me, that's harm. And I've often, there's a lot of areas where some libertarians can't quite grasp that concept.
Yeah, I think that their view of harm is largely materialistic, and harm is a huge gray area. And I could see the gray area, and a lot of them couldn't. They thought it was just like no one got hit, no one got their things stolen. But like you said, I noticed a lot of them were very libertine, like I said. So there was a lot of hooking up. I had a boyfriend, so I was protected from that. But I think they didn't think that there was anything wrong with. There was a lot of polyamory too.
Okay.
Because it's not hurting anyone. How's it hurting anyone? And I was like, what about emotional harm? Like if you cheat on somebody that you're with and you're not exclusive with them, I think there's emotional harm that's done there. But you're not allowed to talk about emotions in those groups, because then are you a liberal?
Right. Yes.
Which I get the reaction against that because of how liberals weaponize emotions. But
yes.
So, and then with hookup culture, it was like, well, it's not hurting anybody. So people were just very, sexually degenerate, but I saw it as harmful. That the non-aggression principle falls apart pretty quickly when you think even a little bit abstractly or think about social and moral harm. A lot of libertarians, like around reason, were also really into vices and like porn. Yeah. And
prostitution,
drugs and vaping.
Prostitution. They like to call it sex work to make it sound fun.
Yeah. And I think I like entertained that idea.
Same. I did as well. I mean, not doing it, but
sure.
But just entertained it as like, well, sure, that's not harming anyone.
And then I think I read the testimonies of ex-sex workers, and they were like, no, I was harmed. And I was like, is anybody actually listening to these women, or is this just some like, something to sound intellectual where you're insulated from? Like every woman that was a libertarian that was writing about being pro-sex work was completely insulated from the realities of it. They didn't have any sex worker friends. Like they didn't talk to Johns. Yeah. So
it's like the rich white liberals are for welcoming every immigrant from around the world into our country, but they're living in a gated community where they'll never experience this type of thing unless they want to take advantage and use them for cheap labor, which is a whole different story. Let's see, where can we go from here? DC, you finally had to get out of there, yes?
Yeah. Well, so I mentioned, do you want to talk politically, or I could get into the existential crisis leading me to California?
Let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we gave all this context for the libertarian scene in DC and how that gave me this huge crisis of life. I found this therapist who I think was an angel, and I think she was a Christian, and she gave me a sense of nuance that I so desperately needed, because she told me it was possible and a sense of paradox. Like a couple things can be true at once, which really breaks a person's ideology, right? If it's like you can see paradoxes.
It's also ubiquitous in Orthodoxy, which we can get to shortly.
Yeah, it's a very Orthodox concept I found out later. She looked at me because I told her, like, I'm sick and I need to die because I can't get better. And she was like, it's possible to be sick and getting better at the same time. And I was like, oh, and I couldn't argue with that. And I was like, oh, I am in therapy. Like I'm taking steps. Okay. Like there's hope. It's just that glimmer of hope, right? Like when you're a leftist libertarian, like what I was lacking was hope. I just saw the world as so bad from every angle. So she really helped to give me that. And so I started to get better. I remember she gave me a sheet of things to do to like help my mentality. And it said meditate or prayer. It was like self-soothing activities. And I remember thinking like, well, prayer is like, I'm never considering Christianity again. Like that, I've already been through that. So I decided to get into meditation. And this led me to being like a Buddhist, yoga, kind of new age, doing psychedelics type girl. Because simultaneously, a lot of libertarians, they were very against the drug war and very into like LSD. And so that was in my environment too. And I tried LSD and I felt good. I was like, oh, okay, this is what I need. I need like therapy, yoga, and like LSD. And that'll be like the things that make me not want to kill myself. And
funny how acceptable those things are in those circles too. If you would have just said, I'm going to be a fundamentalist Christian or Orthodox Christian, they would have been like, whoa.
Yeah.
But this stuff's kind of an easy step. Well, I'm going to change a little bit. Oh, well, that's neat. Experience this.
Yeah. And when you're a young woman, you really care about what people think of you.
Yep.
You have no like confidence yet. So those were the safe things for me to do to try to be well. You know, I wanted to be well enough to want to live. And so I left DC because I was very sick of the political culture there. I'm an artist, and my twin was living in California, and I'd visit her, and I thought that culture suited me more because it was artistic, and I was getting into like Buddhism and these spiritual ideas and LSD, and that is totally the Mecca. The Bay Area is the Mecca of all those things and has a long history of that. So I moved and I got a job at a psychedelic research organization, which is a whole story in and of itself. I don't know if we should get into it, but it is a part of my journey to becoming a Christian. So this organization. Well, I should say when I landed in California after coming from DC, which there's a lot of intelligent people in DC, and a lot of ideas being shared. There are conservatives there, like genuine conservatives. But when I got to California, I was thinking I might have made a mistake because it was this like deep blue communist area. I noticed it immediately. And I think I was slowly getting I know I was new age, but I was getting a little more right as I got older. But you know, I just had to kind of deal with it. So anyway, I'm submerged in this like communist new age culture and working in a company that's working on MDMA assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think, it was a highly experimental place. It was similar to DC in that people were very into polyamory and not being told what to do. It was actually it was communist and libertarian. It's a little hard to explain.
Right.
It was like very lawless.
Yes.
And then also very communistic. A bit of a paradox there because there were all these rules, but then none at all at the same time. Maybe the rules weren't applied in the right place is what I'm trying to get at, like socially or even legally. Because you can just steal from somebody in San Francisco. You can steal up to $900 from a store.
Yep.
And that's fine. Everyone I knew there was the victim of theft.
Really?
Everyone had their car broken into.
Wow.
Everyone had a story of my one friend was punched in the ear off of her motorbike and a homeless man grabbed it and like 3 guys tackled him to get it back. You just heard stuff like that all the time. And I didn't feel safe there. And I realized like the men around me were all feminists.
Yeah.
And what that really meant is that they didn't care to protect women.
Right.
And I could feel my like biological differences, my physical vulnerabilities of being like 5'3" and 110 pounds in a city where there are like men on drugs around. And I felt very scared a lot walking around there. And I had a dispute with a roommate and my dad's not around to help me. So I called the cops and they were like good men. And I think my anarchy was like done after that because they were the only ones that helped me. When I didn't have family around, the cops, and I was an anarchist, right? So again, it's one of those things where like, it's easy to be an anarchist in a place where the law is enforced.
Yeah, go try in San Francisco as a young woman, and all of your men cohorts are basically beta males. It won't help you do anything.
Yeah, it's a bunch of soy boy techies. Like they don't care. It's always like, you got you, right?
Yeah.
And, like I actually don't. Like
right,
I'm afraid walking down the street. Like they would like, if there was like a group of, there's always like street people that were obviously criminals, right? If you're walking past them, these guys would like run ahead of you. It's,
oh my.
Yeah.
The men would?
Yeah. I was like, my God, they had no concept of, because it's a feminist city. It's like, and libertarian. So it's like everyone for themselves and no patriarchy. Like everybody hates patriarchy. So that knocked me out of those ideas pretty quickly. And
were you physically starting to feel like, were you still doing therapy? Was this on the road to, I guess, to sound like a overused cliche, recovery?
I was a lot more stable by this point. Didn't have the same like suicidal ideation, none of those problems anymore. I felt like there's a floor I couldn't fall below anymore.
Oh, good.
Because I had like some spirituality, I think. I think that it was a spiritual crisis that is tied up with politics. It's a little, I want to separate those two things, but they are a bit related.
Yes.
Like the spiritual is the political is the personal.
Yes.
And that's the totem pole.
I find it so interesting that when you said one of the ways it would manifest is that you couldn't talk, because you knew everything you were saying you weren't going to say anything that was correct. If only everyone else felt that way, that has these left-wing ideas in their mind. But it's like, I know you were baptized as a child and then chrismated into the Orthodox Church. It's almost like that baptism, like maybe something was somehow protecting you from how bad it could have been.
I think so, because I really feel that way. Someone told me once, because I did psychedelics in San Francisco when I worked at this psychedelic nonprofit, but not a lot, but I did them and honestly didn't have bad experiences. But someone told me you might have been protected because you were baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And doing them not baptized and with like no protection is very different.
Yes.
So yeah, thank God for that. But what happened, I think, was, I'm meeting all these people in the Bay Area and they're just not good friends. They're flaky. They have these bad ideas. Like I said, the men aren't protective. The women are nuts, like just very neurotic. They would go on regular rants about the patriarchy and racism. And I was starting to not be able to relate to it and felt very atomized. And I think being atomized is actually a good place to get like the truth, because you kind of have nothing to lose, right? So Jordan Peterson had a moment, and my fire dance teacher showed me videos of him where he was talking about Christ, and it's a video called Jordan Peterson, His Finest Moment. And he explains why Western civilization is built on the idea of a man being unfairly crucified and nailed to a cross. And he really just got at like the heart of what that means. Like, we all suffer. Like, the liberals were right that we're oppressed. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's not about like demanding reparations for it from other humans, because they're oppressed too. Like and this tied into my suicidal crisis, right? Like, by virtue of existence, you're kind of humiliated and oppressed just by being here. It's like the human condition is that there's suffering involved in being alive. And the religious people were always trying to say this. This is what they were always getting at, is like, how do you cope with being alive? So all of this started to click, like the suicidal ideation, me being in a city that really rejected Christian values and was a mess. I was like, oh, this is the thing that I need.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here. And you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast. And that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives. It fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high. Clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times. And they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. And then also levels out the dialogue. So there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app. before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
So,
So he revealed himself to you somewhat through Jordan Peterson's speeches online. Mm-hmm. And then you could look around San Francisco and the Bay Area and go, this is what it's like to not have it here.
Yeah.
Okay.
These people reject Christian values and what the West represents. And they're always experimenting. They're always in trouble. Everything's a mess. There's no law. Women are protected. Yes. And then when I reject it personally, I'm very sick. Mm-hmm. And I need, and the people in the psychedelic community, I hate saying that because it's not a community. It's just like, yeah. But they were very rejecting of everything was okay except Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And they always, what I started to notice is they always needed more. They always were doing these drugs. They always needed another ayahuasca ceremony. They always needed another festival where they could do LSD. And then they got into like designer drugs and what happens if we mix them? And they were always like needing this material substance mm-hmm. to supposedly have a spiritual experience.
Yes.
Which didn't make sense to me. Like, why should you be dependent on like a drug that somebody makes to have a spiritual experience if you're human and mm-hmm. Built for that anyway? And I noticed their lives never got any better. Mm-hmm. Like they weren't having radical transformations when they would come back from an ayahuasca ceremony. Mm-hmm. Like they just wanted more drugs. So, yeah, Jordan Peterson has this moment and it all makes a lot of sense to me given the context I had just been in and all the places that I was living and involved with were very rejecting of Christ. So I think I was in a place where I could say, well, what does Jesus represent?
Right.
This is the one place I haven't been looking. So.
And then?
Yeah. And then, so then I dropped all my friends in San Francisco and just binge watched his videos and decided I wanted to be a Christian. And I didn't think I had to pick like a type of Christianity. I knew, and I was very naive. I knew I was raised Catholic. I was learning that there was something called Protestantism. I didn't grow up around that. Mm-hmm. And I still hadn't heard about Orthodox Christianity at this point. So I thought, well, I'll just start going to church. So, mm-hmm. but I would go when there weren't services. And then I gradually started to go when there were services. And I thought maybe since I've been wrong about everything else, I might have been wrong about Catholicism. So I went back to Roman Catholic Church and still didn't connect with it. This was during COVID. The priest was talking about COVID a lot. He was wearing a mask.
Oh no, the priest was?
Yep. Ooh. Yep. Yeah, both of them. And, all his homilies were about COVID when I was going there to try to
on the side of the regime, COVID. On the side of the regime perspective of COVID, or because in the Orthodox Church, we wouldn't be talking about that during a homily for one. But if you did, it would, be that we're fighting this evil spirit that's.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they were like, I think he said it's okay not to come to church if you're afraid of COVID. It was really the softer side of things. And they were, it was, I was looking, okay, that I knew that there was evil happening in the form of how people were reacting to COVID. Mm-hmm. And I wanted somewhere where people understood that and that we were going to transcend that mm-hmm. and respect people's free will. And it was leading me to the church, but I started to realize not every church was the same,
right.
Which is actually a very hard lesson to learn because you don't want to, when you're a Christian, it's so shiny and new and you don't want to, like you found the truth and you don't want to like judge anybody, but then unfortunately, like things are revealed as you're walking that path that you just can't ignore.
Right.
So that church wasn't right. And I went to a Protestant church, and I'm a visual artist. And this place looked like a dentist's office. and and there was like a Jumbotron and a rock band.
Oh, okay.
And you know, I grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
There was no stained glass. The altar was pushed off to the side. We didn't take communion.
Okay.
Like, what? It was so foreign to me. What is this? And again, this was during COVID, and my friend said, doesn't it seem like you could knock that guy over with a feather? Like if shit hit the fan, the pastor doesn't look like he would just run. But I was like, yeah, kind of, like he's kind of weak. Yeah. So, you know, my exploration to other churches was not going well. And then some friends kept telling me I would like Orthodoxy. They kept saying, I think you'd like Orthodoxy. But the word there was no picture that came to my mind.
Sure. Right.
So I'd ignore it. And then a friend commissioned an Orthodox saint painting from me. He wanted it to look a little more realistic, but he liked this Eastern Orthodox saint.
Which saint was it?
I forget his name. It's on my website.
Okay.
I never got to know him because I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah, but now I want you to get to know him because in a way it's who pulled you in. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And it's a very like non-traditional icon. You know, it's like a realistic one. Maybe I should look it up. Let me look it up real quick.
Which website would this be?
This is amy-the-artist.com. And
there we go.
Yes, my art website where you can buy things. Shameless plug. So it was, here he is. Saint Cyprian of Antioch.
Cyprian. That's our friend Cyprian from the Royal Path that's his patron saint.
Yes, and it's interesting. And of Antioch, I've been learning a lot about the ancient city of Antioch because the Antiochian village is near where I live here, and I spent the weekend there.
Yes.
So first Christian city, I think,
and first church ever. Yes.
Yeah.
Saint Peter was the first bishop. Peter from the Bible. All right,
that makes sense.
Yes. So go ahead, Abe.
Anyway, it got me to pay attention to this. I was like, what is this weird religion? Like it's Christian, but I haven't heard of it. Just got me to pay attention. And then that same commissioner took me and my friends to an Orthodox church. And the first one we went to was in kind of an old dying one in the middle of the woods. And the priest was very mean and yelled at us for like cooing at a baby. And I said, I'm never going to become Orthodox. These people are so mean.
Was it Greek?
No, it must have been Brocor or something.
Huh, okay.
No one was there. It was like 4 old people and a baby. And but I thought this is the most beautiful church I've ever been in. The iconostasis really took me. It was like blue. I've never seen a light blue iconostasis before. It was light blue and gold. It was really beautiful. And then after that, with the same group, I went to the church I went to now, and my priest came up to us and was very excited to see us. No other like pastor or priest had approached us and noticed we were new at any of the other churches I went to. And he did. And he said, oh, come up to the front. And he was explaining the symbolism in the icons to me. And it was just like game over then. I was like, this is what I was looking for.
Without even realizing you're an artist?
Yeah. I was like, this is a priest talking to me about paintings. And they're rich with symbolism. Like, how did he know? I don't think he even knew what he was. I don't even know if he'd remember that. But it just felt like God speaking to me very, very clearly. So,
and we should add for the listeners that are aware of who your twin is, that Julie was also on this part of it with you too. She had kind of gone through her own issues on the opposite coast. You go together in San Francisco, you leave San Fran together and end up together in this church that you're in currently. So what was there like a realization like, all right, this is home, this is it, and now I've got to figure out kind of the rest of this, the theology, Christ, etc. Because you have to go through a small catechumenate period, I believe. Like, what was that part like?
Yeah, it was pretty much everything that I read was having been New Age because and into like psychedelics because I liked the mysticism, like the kind of like mystique. Well, Orthodoxy had this very heavy focus on mystery, which I found truthful and honest. Like we just can't explain everything. This life is very mysterious. But we do have some, commandments for you to follow. And it was a little overwhelming. Like the calendar is still difficult for me. I'm still learning that, especially because Orthodox churches have different calendars. Some of them do. But I read these little ancient faith pamphlets, these booklets that they had at the front of the church. And in one of the brochures was a timeline of church history.
Yes.
And that sold me, for lack of a better word, even further, because like I said, I was raised Catholic, then I thought I could just like pick any church. And that gave me the explanation for why there were so many different Christian churches and what happened in history where there were the 5 Orthodox churches, and then the Catholic Church split off, installed a pope, became very corrupt, and then Protestants protested the corruption of the Catholic Church and kind of started to strip away more of the traditions. So it all made sense, and I was like, "Oh, this is the closest I can get to Jesus Christ. This is the oldest and most ancient church."
Excellent. And so, I want to ask about the art too, because you weren't painting icons. You got requested to paint an icon that brought you to the church. Where did this road go for you as far as being an artist goes? Did you just start, I want to focus on iconography, or did you still do other stuff? Were you being pulled towards Christian art?
I kind of want to back up and talk about how art was like a spiritual practice for me and how this led me to painting saints. So when I was in the psychedelic community, I got not very involved, but I would make more psychedelic art for this. I went to an art church, which was just like a pagan, like drug nest, really. And, but I went there because the man is this very famous painter named Alex Gray, he had an ethos that art was spiritual, a spiritual practice. And I never really heard that before. And I was kind of in my puberty between New Age and Christianity. And he had a couple paintings of Jesus. Now I consider them heretical, but it was this like bridge between worlds for me. And I went there and learned a bit about, I found their message rather incoherent, but because it was pagan and New Age, obviously it has like some truths in it, but it's not the full truth because Jesus is dethroned as king.
Okay.
Yeah, their depictions lowered him onto the level of like Sophia, which is this like Gnostic deity.
Yes.
And Hindu gods. And it was like, yeah, he was like an ascended master, but he wasn't who he said he was.
Yeah, this is Gnosticism.
Yeah. So
it's almost like you needed this step, though. I think it's kind of a helpful step getting you to the final spot.
Yeah, it was pretty important because I want to say also I started to notice that the like psychedelic world were religionizing psychedelics. The psychedelics were like their replacement for Holy Communion. And they would even do icons of their saints, which are the people who, sound ridiculous, the people who discovered these drugs, like the guy who first took an acid trip and Alan Watts and
Timothy Leary and people like this.
Yeah, and they'd paint them like this with like a halo around their head.
Wow.
So I'm coming out of that context made it make sense, made Orthodoxy make more sense because I could see that people were built for religious worship and for something ancient and holy. And they were trying to reinvent it, but like they couldn't fully get away from it.
Right.
Like it was like in them and it was coming out just in this like perverse way.
Yes.
So yeah, coming out of that space of painting like, just like girls with halos and like trippy stuff around them. It wasn't that big of a jump for me to paint things.
Okay.
Because I had a conflict where I would just pick up a photo of a model and paint her. And I had this conflict where I was in my conscience, well, I don't know who this woman is. Like, I don't know if she has good character. And I feel like it's kind of special to paint somebody. And I just pulled this image off the internet. And what if I'm like painting and immortalizing someone who isn't a very good person? That was just like a dim awareness in my mind. So when I found Orthodoxy and there's this practice of painting saints, it felt very comfortable for me and it calmed that. questioning I had. Like, who am I painting? It's like, well, here's who you're painting. It's someone who is a very holy person.
Yes. And I've heard you say, which I thought was pretty neat, that when you do paint a saint, it feels like you get to know them as you're doing it.
Yeah. Yes. I researched, because I find it a little overwhelming how many saints there are.
Yes.
And sometimes I'm like, I don't know who to look at.
Yes. And there's
the whole
more.
community.
I heard Father Turbo say this the other day, something that I hadn't thought about. There's more that we don't know than we do know of. Amazing.
Oh, I totally feel that. It's like tip of the iceberg, and then underneath there's just all of this information. So I like when people come to me and ask me to paint saints, because maybe they have a relationship with that saint and they're sharing it with me. And then I look into them and then I grow my relationship. It's very communal and relational. If they have a relationship with the saint, they pass it to me. I develop a relationship with that saint. Like, some are closer than others, but it's a good way for me to learn the faith.
You went through like your whole life. I mean, this is just how the world is with all of us, but it's been a spiritual battle. It's like spiritual warfare the entire time. And although at times the evil was maybe breaking a few barriers down on you, it seems like there was some sort of barrier that wouldn't be broken.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful. Yes, I think that's true. I never, something was like protecting me the whole time. When I was at that pagan art church, it was a cult. We'll just call it what it is. And they wanted me, I had a lot of opportunities to like rise up and be a visionary artist, they would call them, in this psychedelic space. And they wanted me to like live paint and like help them with their marketing. And I could have gotten a lot of attention in that space, but something inside me was like don't put it hard there. Like, don't get too involved.
Yes.
And I didn't. So, but I gave up a lot. I could have had a career that way if I wanted to. There's a lot of money there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people need to hear that. There's people that get these offers and these doors seem to open for them in different ways, and they know instinctually, like, probably shouldn't do this. I think I need, but the fame. It's the whole selling your soul thing, you know, it's musician. There's an old blues. Yeah, it's quite literally that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, paint these. I would have been painting like heretical things, and there's a lot of people paint demons in the psychedelic space, and they're not aware that they're demons. Yeah. Yeah.
The demons know, though.
Yep.
Well, I guess we can get you out of here. Talk about the Mystic Sisters and the relationship you have with Julie, and kind of what y'all like doing on the Substack and the podcast and everything.
Oh, yeah. I could have talked a bit about how being a twin also protected me from some of this stuff, because like the hyper individualism of libertarianism.
Oh, yeah. You never have that.
It never made sense to me. I was like, well, I have a community. Like, I'm kind of I always knew there was a tension between individualism and communalism. So another paradox, right?
Yes.
Because and that protected me from a lot of bad things too, because I always had a family member around when I was in these bad spaces.
Yes.
Not in DC, but in San Francisco. So we're very close. And we like to work together, and we're both very creative. And I think people like looking at twins. So that's why part of why we perform together and do a podcast. It's just like, kind of a novel thing. Not everybody has that. So very special. And we write on a joint Substack. We do fire dancing performances at like church camps and kids' birthday parties and weddings and things like that. But right now we're doing a podcast on YouTube. It's the Mystic Sisters.
Awesome. And you thought about changing it to the Mystic Twins. So far, everyone I've heard says keep it Mystic Sisters. So
I think the S from Mystic goes nicely with sisters.
Sisters, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of S's. So
excellent. Anything else you want to plug?
Follow my Instagram. We could put it in
there. You go.
Yeah, I post most of my art there, and then link to places where you can support my art.
And since I messed up on the ad, I said Amy underscore. It's Amy ___ the _ artist. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'll
somebody
finally
has-
link it correctly. Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome. Amy Mastrini, thanks for being here on Counterflow.
Thank you, Buck.
You're welcome. All right. What a story. Thank you so much, Amy, for doing that with us. As for this show, every Tuesday night, you guys know now, it drops, it premieres live on the YouTube channel at 7 p.m. Central Time. Just go hit subscribe to the YouTube channel, and that's how you can get all of the notifications, and that's how you can see. Trust me, you want to see this interview with Amy rather than just hear it, and it ain't because of me, I can tell you that. Counterflowpodcast.com is the website. Follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. And next week, Jay Dyer returns to the show, and I'm really looking forward to that one. I know a lot of you guys might have been brought to shows like mine or to Orthodoxy from Jay Dyer himself, so he'll be here, and I can't wait for that. Until then, you guys have an awesome week. See ya.
You get split in half, the icon, the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.